You are listening to the Brought to Light Masonic Podcast, a podcast for Freemasons and the public, bringing you to light through discussions and research papers about Australian Freemasonry and Victoria in particular.
Welcome back to the Brought to Light Masonic Podcast. It's your host, Jack Aquilina, here with your other host, Brother James Mann. Hello, James.
How you going, Jack?
I hope you've been well. And another week here for our Masonic podcast, our second episode. And we're actually going to be basing this episode on spirituality and Freemasonry. Why Freemasonry is not a religion. So just having a quick chat about that, and we'll hear a reading that I'll be doing about an article that I wrote, which was published in the Midnight Freemasons most recently. And James will be asking some questions about why Freemasonry is not a religion, from the perspective of a new candidate. So we may as well get right into it, I reckon, James. So go ahead.
Yeah, one thing I was wondering is, in Freemasonry, if you don't have to, if it's not a religion, then why do you have to believe in a supreme being?
That's a good question. I mean, the main reason we have that requirement is because of the United Grand Lodge of England. They require that to be a regular lodge, you must have a belief in a supreme being. And it goes back to the I guess our teachings are based on a lot of the principles that come out of, say, holy books or holy scripture. And because of that, I think there used to be a belief that you couldn't be a moral man unless you believed in God, which has changed. Our generation doesn't see it that way. And that's something I sort of covered in my article. I was speaking about how today we have a culture of skepticism, where people are naturally skeptical about institutions that have stood the test of time. So people are more sceptical about governments than they've ever been. They're more sceptical about churches than they've ever been, and they're more sceptical about institutions like Freemasonry. So part of that is what you're seeing is a conflict between a requirement that was set a long time ago when the belief in God was a must, when everyone believed in God, versus the modern sort of cultural skepticism that's governing today's sort of cultural climate. So why do we need a belief in a supreme being? I'd say tradition. The question is, what does that belief require, I guess? That's the real question.
So what does that belief require exactly?
Well, I mean, that's a tough one.
You did touch on it in the last episode.
Yeah. I mean, as I said in the last episode, the actual requirement, think about the word supreme being. It's a very loose term, yeah? So the requirement is that you believe in a greater power or a higher power. Honestly, considering the fact that when you go through the interview process, you're only asked ever this question once: do you believe in a supreme being? By which you must answer yes, obviously, to be a member. I've never heard of anyone being quizzed on their belief or what that entails. So what does it mean? It really means it requires you to believe in something greater than yourself, something bigger than humanity, that the universe is not just a set of random consequences. It's happening by course of something greater than our own. Doesn't mean that something has to be interventionist either. It doesn't have to be a creative force, but it has to be something that is greater than ourselves. That's where I draw the line, at least. Some people may have a different view. It's quite contentious, actually. But, I'd probably say that's what the belief in a supreme being requires.
That's right. Well, why is religion not spoke about in Lodge?
Well, we don't speak about politics or religion because the two greatest things that divide people in this world is politics and religion. And we don't meet in Lodge to worship the deity in which we serve. We don't meet for that purpose. That is the place for church. As I said in my article, I think in Mark Cultural Revere's work, in his book, Freemasonry and Introduction, I believe it's called, he said something on the lines of, the Freemasonry has no church, it has no ministry. Although it is not opposed to such things, it just has none of its own to offer. And that's a good summary of what Freemasonry is about, in the sense that it isn't about teaching you the way that God or a deity would want you to live, or what principles a God or a deity would want you to espouse. It's not about worship. We worship none in Lodge. We don't worship anything other than our own personal God. And that's not questioned or discussed because it's personal. And the purpose of Lodge is to develop your moral principles.
Yeah, a lot of people who don't attend, or non-Masons, who obviously wonder what happens behind the closed doors, might think that Freemasonry is a religion. What exactly is the difference between Freemasonry and religion?
It's a very fine line between what is spirituality versus religion. And I think that's the distinction we're talking about. Freemasons are spiritual, right? We believe in the sense that our practices promote the art of spirituality. And we believe that as Freemasons, there is more to the world than our own. So therefore, we're naturally spiritual. We believe there's something greater than just our flesh and bone, right? And religion, however, religion requires you to have that, but it then takes it the next step further. It says that you must profess a belief in a particular god or gods, and that you must adhere to a certain canon or belief, set of beliefs or practices or rituals. You must adhere to those things. No questioning, no changing. If you are a Christian, you must believe in the birth, the Immaculate Conception, the resurrection of Christ. You must believe those things. If you are a Christian, you cannot question those things. That's dogmatic in the sense that it requires you to adhere to that belief. Whereas Freemasonry is not dogmatic. It's the opposite of dogmatism. It encourages individual perceptions and requires you to look at symbols with moral teachings that is not belonging to any religion and to think of interpreting in a way that means something to you.
Yeah, so what you're saying is Freemasonry is more along the lines of spirituality.
Yeah.
Which I think the world should know that that is what Freemasonry is about, especially lately, a spiritual awakening. I'm reading about that a lot online. There's a lot of that going on, so I think people would really enjoy to listen to, I suppose, a Freemason's perspective of spirituality.
I think our generation is more spiritual than ever before.
Yeah.
There is our grandparents' generation believed in God for a lot of reasons. I think the most compelling of which was it was a cultural practice. It was seen as a good virtue to believe in God and to be religious, a practicing Christian, or in this country, Christianity, obviously, but other countries, whatever faith may be, the relevant faith. Whereas I think that these days, people who are our age, who are young, genuinely have spiritual experience. They genuinely believe and feel as though there is more to the world than just us, right? In terms of life and existence. We contemplate these things, and I think that Freemasonry provides that avenue. We provide, rather than a religious teaching, we provide a philosophical teaching. And I think that's a good way of putting it. There really is a philosophical element to craft Freemasonry that religion doesn't really allow you to explore.
So how exactly does it affect the new members?
Well, in terms of a new member wanting to join, you need to think very carefully about what you believe, right? And it might be just something as simple as, I identify as a Christian because my family are Christians, right? That's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. But just be prepared that if you don't have a strong religious view, it's not going to affect your progression through the craft. In fact, I believe the more open-minded you come to Freemasonry, the better you'll actually go. Because Freemasonry is about giving you practical tools to live your life and isn't concerned with the questions or subjects of religion. So how does it affect a joining member? It affects them in the sense that they need to be prepared to say that they believe in a supreme being. I guess the only way you can say that is if you actually know what that is.
Yeah, so how about an atheist? If an atheist wanted to join Freemasonry, they thought that they were of good moral character, but they just didn't exactly believe in a supreme being.
Yeah, look, that's a very pertinent question. I think that's one of the more controversial questions. And if an atheist wants to join Freemasonry, they can't. Simple as that, unless they lie and say that they believe in God. And that's a shame, in my view. It's it brings to mind a question of what sort of people do we want to be members? And if our organisation is focused on the promotion of good moral values, surely in today's society where young people are more focused on ethics and principles, which are not religious, how does that make them any better or worse than someone who is religious? So it's a good question. But the short answer is no, an atheist can't join.
I have heard of people joining who use their supreme being as the elements, like fire, earth, water, air. Would you call them an atheist?
No, I'd say...
So what's your perspective of that?
In my view, I think that's a completely legitimate view of the world, in the sense that they believe that, and it has to inform them. You have to understand that the whole point of the supreme being requirement is it has to inform your moral compass, right? If the argument is if you're an atheist, you have no moral compass because you don't believe in a greater power. Therefore, you have no rules or standards by which to... I don't think that's a very fair thing to say about atheists. In fact, I think it's wrong because an atheist can want to live a good life just as much as anyone else. But if someone who believes in the elements of, fire, water, nature, let's go further. Let's talk about physics and, gravity and, dark matter and all these other things that people and scientists are very exciting times in terms of what they're discovering. I think that's perfectly legitimate. In my view, I'd have no issue with being in lodge with a brother who has those beliefs because they're legitimate. They inform his character, and that's what's important. There are two strains of thought here. There are those who are more traditional who believe that Freemasonry should, and especially in the United States, some southern states in the United States, believe that Freemasonry must be a Christian organisation, right? It must espouse Christian principles, right? If you do not act in a manner that is adherent to Christian principles, then you're not following the moral code. That's what their view is. And in states like Georgia and Tennessee, the United Grand Lodge of Georgia and Tennessee has saw fit to ban members of the LGBTI community from Freemasonry based on the fact that it's not Christian. And that's really disturbing, in my view. I mean, you got to understand, Freemasonry was created as a radical organisation in its time during the Enlightenment, in a period where it was about natural equality, electing the leaders of your lodge and Grand Lodge. Radical views, the idea of individual expression, respecting individual relationships with God or high powers, which you do not question, you should respect, right? And traditionalists seem to forget that. And I think the other strain of thought is probably towards deism, the concept that you don't have to believe in a religion, but you have to believe in a deity, a creating force, right? Which I think is what a lot of atheists or people who are agnostic, right, who don't know the answer, use as a cover when they join Freemasonry. They say, I believe in a deity, I'm a deist, right? And I'd probably subscribe to that view myself in the sense that I don't pretend or profess to know the answers to the universe's questions.
Well, I still think that's a good answer because they're saying that they believe there's something, they just don't know what.
Yes.
So that's fine.
I think that's fine. I mean, some people would disagree with that. Depends what your individual perspective is. But there's the two strains of thoughts. I tend to think that younger people fit in the latter category. And as an organisation, I think we'd be making a big mistake if we assume that for some reason, just because someone isn't grounded in organised religion, that they're not fit members for Freemasonry, which I think, in fact, it's the opposite. The less grounded they are, perhaps maybe the more opportunity we can provide to assist them with the way they live their life.
Yeah, well, the world's changing at a rapid rate as well.
Yeah.
So I suppose it's something that we do need to consider in Freemasonry, how the world's changing. And I suppose how we can just fit in with it. So that way we continue to get new candidates and new members, or it's not going to be too appealing to people, I guess. And
look, by all means, let me make it clear, the United Grand Lodge of Victoria is leading the way on this front because from what I've seen, lodges in our jurisdiction are more than open to accepting people's beliefs, even if they aren't traditional, right? It almost seems to be an don't ask, don't tell policy, where the interview... when they're interviewed, the question is asked, do you believe in a supreme being? An answer is given, and from that point onwards, you're no longer required to justify that. Unless you join a Christian order, such as the Knights Templars or something like that, even then, you don't have to be a Christian, from what I understand. All you have to be is willing to swear an oath to protect Christianity. And I've heard arguments from people saying that, I'm not a Christian, but I'm willing to defend Christianity. I'm comfortable to do that because I'll defend all religions. So that's how they get in, that's how they circumvent the rule. We need to be open, we need to be transparent, and we are in Victoria, and that's why we're getting a lot of young people joining. And the only way we're going to continue to attract young people is to appeal to their sense of self. They want to improve themselves. More than ever in society, have this pressure for people to be, on the ball, and we provide that. And I think that by having a requirement, a loose requirement to believe in a supreme being, you're going to ultimately capture a larger class of people who should be members of our organisation. And if you're really interested in this topic, I think on the 10th of July, the Masonic Light podcast, it's our friends in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, are going to be talking about this topic. And they're actually going to be getting a reverend on their show, where my paper may get a mention, actually, from what I've been told. But it'll be an opportunity for you to hear how they do it in America. One thing that's different about Australian culture is we're not. This religion concept isn't as ingrained as it is overseas. We don't have this affinity towards the country being a certain persuasion. We don't say it's not a Christian country. It's
really multicultural.
It's a multi-faith, multi-race, liberal democratic society that is based on principles of equality and egalitarian, all that sort of stuff. So, whereas the US is very much, they're very, very a lot of Christians. The evangelical Christian movement over there is huge and been very successful. It's the reborn, the whole concept of being reborn through Christ. That concept has been really strong, and therefore religion plays a bigger role in their debates than it does over here. So I guess that has an effect on Freemasonry.
My view on, I suppose, religion is I think it's confused with spirituality and history. They've kind of connected it together, spirituality and history, to the same thing, and people don't take in the fact that we're all from all different parts of the world and we all have our own history, but we do all share spirituality, which is really important. But it's just, I guess it kind of sucks that some people will get caught up in certain things right. I suppose with Freemasonry, it's unique. So everything that you're learning in the ritual is unique and is right in that sense, because there's nothing quite like Freemasonry.
Yeah, and that's the great thing about Freemasonry. It supplements. If you are religious, it enhances your religious experience because it asks you to contemplate moral principles that aren't necessarily emphasised at church. I mean, we borrow our moral principles from a lot of these texts. You've got to remember, our ceremonies are not informed only by the Old Testament, but the traditions going back to the ancient mystery schools in Egypt, ancient Egypt, and ancient Greece, the schools of Pythagoras, all these traditions, right through to the Templars, the Rosicrucian movement. All these ideas and concepts have been brought together to make the Masonic ritual, which borrows the best from all these traditions, the best storytelling traditions. And I guess in my article that I wrote, I reflected on Christopher Hitchens, who you may be familiar with. He's passed away now, but he was one of the most anti-religious people you've ever met. He wrote a book called "God Is Not Great: Why Religion Poisons Everything." So he was he was atheist, very anti-religion, and it was quite ironic actually, because I admire his intellect, and he's a very provocative writer. But he wrote somewhere in there that humanity needs a new enlightenment, focused on science and the concepts of self-discovery. Knowing thyself, he says, in quoting the constellations of Greek philosophy. And you reflect on that as a Freemason, you think that's quite ironic, because he's saying that religion prevents that. Maybe that's true or false, I'm not sure. But it's funny that an organisation like Freemasonry, in fact, provides for that very thing he's talking about. The first degree is about the beginning of life. The second degree is about learning. It's about education. It's about improving your intellectual powers, right? And the third degree is about bringing all that together to live a meaningful existence, so that when you die, you don't regret your existence, right? You have nothing to fear when you die because you've lived a life worthwhile living, right? And it's funny or ironic that Hitchens' so-called need for a new enlightenment is actually found in Freemasonry. So we provide that secular moral teachings that religion doesn't provide, that maybe a philosophy class would probably provide to an extent. But we provide it in a manner that's quite useful. So that's what makes us different to religion, completely different.
Yeah, I guess it's spirituality, and spirituality is a really unique thing, and it's something I think humans do need in their life.
Yeah.
You need to find it in your own way. As I was saying in the first episode, coming to Freemasonry was my way of supporting like my spirituality. I know heaps of people got heaps of different ways, especially these days. Like whether it's just like the little gems, and I'm not sure if you heard about them, but people they'll charge them in the full moon. Like I suppose all those kind of things. Like I might not believe in it, you might not believe in it, but it's their way of spirituality. Yeah. It's still a connection to whatever is out there that we can't see.
Yeah, I mean,
in their own way.
It's a way. I think spirituality different from religion in the sense that it's an expression of ourselves through the medium of a belief in something else, right? Spirituality is at the ethos of our character. It is the underlying sentiment that makes us who we are. And to be spiritual is to recognise that as human beings, in the very least, we've developed a sense of consciousness or awareness of ourselves that is unlike anything else, right? We can think in a way that's unprecedented. We can create. We can judge. We can contemplate. And what spirituality is a recognition that consciousness, that inner mind, is something more than just the operation of biological existence, right? Cells and blood flowing and electrical signals. And it's a recognition that conscious existence is special. And people express that in different ways, whether it's, through Freemasonry, through cultural practices that date thousands of years, whether it be, tarot cards or, looking into...
the Wicca,
yeah,
all that kind of stuff.
Astronomy, or astrology, sorry, all that stuff, whatever form of expression it takes is important. I think it is important to a healthy existence, to contemplate your conscious mind, your inner self, right? Some people, other traditions refer to it as the third eye. The concept of the eye that sees everything.
The pineal gland.
Yeah, that concept. And that's another way of us rationalising this business, which we can't explain, right? Which is very interesting. I think it's a very interesting topic.
Yeah, like I think with religion, they're really it's one-sided. They're all kind of, you've got to do this if you're part of this religion, and you can't do anything from the other religions. So I met a Hindu guy a while ago, and what I loved about Hinduism was he said if he finds something in Christianity, or he finds something in Judaism or Islam or Buddhism, he'll add it to his own religion. Like he'll just add that to his life. So it's not necessarily religion, but to me that's spirituality. He's creating his own spirituality for himself.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit of a history buff, and it might not be that interesting to know, but there was a civil war in England in the 1600s, and it was fought for a lot of reasons. But one of the main reasons it was fought was over this concept of traditional religion versus what they called a form of Puritanism. It's all Christianity, but the Puritans believed that the relationship between the individual and God was just that, an individual relationship. They didn't believe in churches. They didn't believe in ornaments. They didn't believe in fancy parades or popes or shrines. They believed that the connection between God and the individual was sacred, and that the only thing a person needed to connect with God was this Holy Scripture, right? And the concept was that the other religions that had popes and bishops and all these other things were destroying the meaning of religion, which was a relationship between God and the individual and man as an individual relationship. So there's a whole war fought over it, and it resulted in radical change in England, which has consequently affected every Western country. And that sort of highlights that this tension has always existed, right? You've got dogma, which is a prescriptive form of teaching, which means it teaches through adherence. So it says you must believe this, you must do this, you must do that, which is fine. A lot of organised religion adheres to that. And then there's a more subtle version of it where it's more individual. And I think what Freemasonry does is it takes that tradition of individual reflection and makes it an important part of its ceremonies. But as I said before, it doesn't profess a way to salvation. It doesn't profess a God or entity to believe in, and it doesn't require you, or it doesn't teach you how to live a life that is moral in the eyes of God. Rather, it teaches you as a living human being how to live your life better while you're here. So it's about life.
Yeah, it's just, I guess, it's about yourself and other human beings, how you treat each other, rather than what you do to make it to the next life. But that's what the religion kind of scares you with, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, that's the concept of religion. It's about preparing for the next life. Whereas I think Freemasonry encourages us to live our current life in the best way possible. And there's no tension between the two. The Freemasonry complements religion, and religion probably complements Freemasonry, but they're exclusively different. They do different things. They're completely different. It'd be like comparing the speedboat or the race car. Like one's on land, right, and has a specific purpose, right, and one's on water and has a specific purpose, right. They're driven differently. The licenses are different. All these things, right. Yet they have similar precepts. They're both fast, right. They're both raced. Just because there's some similarities doesn't make one the other. Right? So Freemasonry is able to borrow the best from all the traditions, from both religious and philosophical and intellectual schools, all three of them, and bring it together into what I believe to be a fantastic set of rituals. And the only requirement to enter that is to believe in a supreme being, which, as we said, is pretty vague.
Yeah, that's right. We'll wrap it up tonight for episode 2 of Spirituality and Freemasonry. It's been great seeing your perspective on it. I really enjoyed the conversation we had. Tonight we'll finish off with a reading by Jack Aquilina, Filling the Gap of Spirituality for the Modern Man.
Freemasonry, filling the gap of spirituality for the modern man. One of the greatest myths conveyed about Freemasonry is its apparent propensity to resemble that of a religious organisation. In fact, amongst the many myths and dispersions cast against our fraternity, the most difficult to coherently dispel has been those rumours that seek to depict the craft as a religious body. Many a Grand Lodge has sought to dispel this myth by outright denial of this accusation, pointing towards the craft's intolerance for religious discussion and the niche discrepancies between our practices and the dictionary definition of organised religion. Whilst it is true that every Freemason must trust his faith in a belief of a supreme being, the instant ambiguity of that requirement, in conjunction with its lack of prescriptive dogma, should indicate to an attentive reader that Freemasonry is inherently outside the scope and purpose of organised religion. In his work, The Lost Keys of Freemasonry, Manly P. Hall eloquently contended that the true Mason realises it is life which he considers when measuring the worth of a brother. It is to this life that he appeals for a recognition of spiritual unity. This contention is even put more plainly by Marquis Cultural Revere's work entitled Freemasonry: An Introduction, where he argues that whilst Freemasonry focuses on moral behaviour and spirituality, it itself is not a religion. Freemasonry uses many spiritual symbols. However, Freemasonry offers no saviour or plan for salvation. There is no priesthood or ministry, although it is not opposed to such things, but it does not have any of its own to offer. The distinction between spirituality and religion is undoubtedly a difficult concept to differentiate, and in many cases can become conflated in discussion. For what is spiritual to one person may be insignificant to another, and is very much embroiled in the individual character and perspective of the prospective participant. Nonetheless, it is the contention of this author that the subjective spirituality of Freemasonry and its capacity to engage the moral and intrinsic questions about a man's individual character is its greatest asset, in a period where cultural scepticism is embedded in the minds of our modern society. It is not unreasonable to observe that a majority of modern men are less religious, more sceptical, and far less tolerant of dogmatic interventions, and that some have justly become to perceive as contrary to a modern instinct to question the status quo and to approach questions of life and existence from the perspective of individual reason. Individual morality, for many young men, is found more at home in a class of ethics rather than faith, and less certainty is had about the role of one's spiritual dispositions in fostering a meaningful understanding of the world around us. The late Christopher Hitchens' literary work, God is Not Great, is arguably one of the 21st century's most compelling personifications of this growing cultural scepticism. Hitchens, unafraid to tackle the biggest questions of faith and reason, ironically provides a fascinating insight about the ethos of modern society, with his view of there being a need for a new enlightenment. This enlightenment, he contends, will base itself on the proposition that the proper study of mankind is man and woman. Hitchens continues that enlightenment is within the compass of the average person, through the study of literature and poetry, the unfettered pursuit of scientific inquiry, with the aim to know yourself, as the Greeks gently suggested in the constellations of philosophy. Whilst Hitchens himself was a profound antagonist of religion, and a self-professed servant to his own sense of infallible reason and logic, one cannot help but to observe that perhaps the enlightenment he professes is in fact more at home with spirituality than one would first think to perceive. In fact, as many of Freemason may have identified, the Hitchens enlightenment resembles a great deal to that of the allegorical contemplations of the 3 degrees in craft Freemasonry. In the first degree of Freemasonry, a brother is invited to consider the useful lessons of natural equality and mutual dependence. The allegory that as mortal beings, we are but brought into this world in darkness, for which we may only avail ourselves through an understanding and respect of our fellow man, bears great similarity to Hitchens' enlightenment. Further, the concept that true enlightenment is achieved through a strong pursuit in an education of nature, the liberal arts and science, is a key lesson of the second degree. This degree's encouragement for man to avail himself of the secrets of nature and science is presented as an important path to attaining intellectual truth. However, it is the third degree in Freemasonry, with its focus on our inevitable mortality and a contemplation of our finite time on earth, that truly rounds off our capacity to truly know yourself. However, unlike Hitchens, Freemasonry, through its avid contemplation of these lessons, embeds itself in the ultimate understanding that whilst these lessons are founded in rationality, that is through the spiritual contemplation of their greater meaning that they bear true attachment to our lives and characters. As eloquently put by Brother Owen Shea in his publication Journey on the Level, regardless of the names assigned to truth, emblematical of the Supreme Being, the key point is that the candidate must believe that there is something more, something unknown, and something beyond our limited understanding of the material world, something that relates to the underlying order of the universe and to the true nature of our consciousness. Freemasonry unequivocally has the power to provide for the modern man an opportunity to expand their understanding of their own intellectual, philosophical, and ultimately spiritual perception of the world and their humanity. As has been demonstrated when deconstructing Hitchens' enlightenment, the quest for a rational understanding of the world has been grounded in the traditions of the craft for hundreds of years and underpinned in its significance by spirituality. Modern society's propensity towards cultural skepticism has been a true challenge to religion and its role in the lives of younger generations. However, as already indicated, Freemasonry is not a religion. Through Freemasonry, a modern man has the opportunity to confront and contemplate life's most important questions, and through the spirituality of our allegorical contemplation, can bridge the divides of diversity to better develop their subjective intellect and morality. For the modern man, Freemasonry is free of dogmatic instruction, subject to individual reason, and veiled in spirituality.
You have been listening to the Brought to Light Masonic podcast, bringing you to light through discussions and research papers about Australian Freemasons and the Victorian jurisdiction in particular. We look forward to speaking to you on our next edition, and until then, we are happy to meet, sorry to part, and happy to meet again. Good night.